All right, today we're going to unpack the psychology behind buying a home. It's one of the biggest, most emotional decisions we ever make, and you know what? It's filled with a surprising amount of irrationality. So let's dive in.
So let's just start with the big question, right? Why on earth do we make such illogical choices when the stakes are so high? I mean, you can spend years saving up, planning everything perfectly, and then suddenly you're swayed by something that has absolutely nothing to do with the numbers. What is really going on in our heads?
The tricky part is there isn't one single book or guide called The Psychology of Home Buying. The answers and the insights, they're scattered all over the place. So what we've done here is piece it all together for you. Think of this as the map to navigate this really complex world.
Okay, our first stop, learning the core concepts. Because before we can even begin to spot the psychological traps out there in the real estate jungle, we need to learn the language. We've got to get the fundamentals of behavioral economics down first.
Think of this slide as your essential library, your starter pack for understanding how our minds work with money. You can kick things off with the big, mind-blowing ideas from the pioneers on TED. Then, you can build a solid foundation with the economic principles from a place like Khan Academy. After that, see how today's top minds break it all down on Big Think, and finally, get the specific terms and vocabulary from a dedicated channel like The Behavioral Economist. See how each piece builds on the last? That's how you build your toolkit.
So here's the term you're going to hear over and over again: cognitive bias. But what does it actually mean? Well, simply put, it's like a predictable mental shortcut. It's a systematic pattern, meaning it's not random, that makes us create our own little subjective reality. And listen, this has nothing to do with being smart or not smart. It's just how our brains are wired.
Section 2. Decoding irrational behavior. All right, so we have the definitions down. Now let's move from the theory to the real world and see how these concepts pop up in our day-to-day decisions.
And you really can't talk about irrationality without bringing up Dan Ariely. This quote here just nails why his work is so important. He zeroes in on how powerful our emotions are, but maybe even more crucially, how the context of a choice can totally flip the script on what we decide to do.
These resources are where you can see all those theories in action. You've got thinkers like Dan Ariely explaining why we're so predictably irrational. Then there's Nir Eyal, whose work on how we get hooked is fascinating, especially when you think about how quickly we get attached to a house. And channels like Vox or the School of Life are just fantastic for seeing how these hidden forces shape everything, from massive market bubbles to our deepest personal feelings.
And now for part 3, where the rubber really meets the road. Psychology meets real estate. Let's bring all this knowledge home, literally, and apply it directly to the housing market. Okay, this slide right here is a total eye-opener. On the left, you've got all the standard, logical advice we always hear: location, price, the comps, the data. But the behavioral lens on the right, that reveals what's really driving the bus. We're talking about stuff like anchoring bias, where you get stuck on the very first price you see, or social proof, that powerful feeling that you should make an offer because everyone else is. And of course, there's that intense fear of missing out, FOMO, and that powerful emotional attachment that just takes over before you even know what's happening.
So where can you actually see these ideas being talked about? Well, you have to do a little digging. On huge real estate channels like BiggerPockets, you can search for terms like market sentiment or buyer psychology. And on finance channels from people like Graham Stephan, you can listen for those specific warnings about the common mental traps that investors fall into. The clues are all there. You just have to know what you're looking for.
All right, let's land the plane with our final section, building your behavioral toolkit. So how do you take all this scattered information from all these different places and turn it into something you can actually use?
Look, if there's one thing you take away from all this, let it be this: you are not going to find one perfect source that has all the answers. True understanding comes from stitching it all together yourself, connecting the broad theories of how our brains work with the very specific high-stakes game of real estate. You have to connect those dots.
And this slide basically lays out your game plan. It's a simple 3-step process. First, you learn the core theories from those foundational channels we mentioned. Second, you go watch the experts and see how these ideas actually play out in human behavior. And then third, the final step, is you start actively looking for these biases every time you watch or read something about real estate and finance.
So, we'll leave you with a final thought. You have the map now. You have a guide to understanding these hidden forces at play. So the next time you're facing a really big decision, a house, a car, maybe a career change, what's the first bias you're going to look for?